Hi, my name is Meredith from fastgrowingtrees.com, and today I'm going to show you how to measure your landscape. There's a couple different ways you can do it, but today we're actually going to take a tape measure in our yard and map things out. So what you will need to do this is, of course, a tape measure. This one I think is used for sports, but it can really be whatever type of tape measure as long as it's long enough for your yard. So this one, just for example, is 100 feet. I also have something to write on, take some notes. This is just graph paper that I've roughly sketched out just a general outline of the yard. Does not have to be exact, just something so you can reference, and of course something to write with. Now that we have our materials, now we actually need to start measuring our yard. So the easiest place to begin with this is to start from a wall. Maybe it's the shed, house. In this case, the fence will actually work great because it's not something that's going to move. Think of this as the anchor for the rest of your map. Then after we have that kind of laid out on our notes here, we're going to go around the property. So again, this could just be the design area or your entire yard, whatever fits your needs. And then from there, we're going to map out to stuff like a fire pit or a tree, just the prominent features in your yard, again, that are going to stay within your landscape. So this is our second boundary that we're going to measure, and this we have a gate to consider. We aren't going to worry about the grill because this is a movable feature, so we can place it wherever we want in our landscape. But as we're measuring, we're going to make note of when the gate begins and ends so that we can translate it to our map, and remember to always, after every time you measure, to note it on your map. So I'm going to put that right there for right now. We're going to secure this to one end of our gate or our fence and just walk it along. And we're gonna stop right here because it's our gate, and that's right at 7 feet. And so the other end of our gate is at 11.5. And then we're gonna continue the rest of the way. And it looks like our gate is exactly 21.5 feet. So as we mark it down on our map, we're going to make sure of those two measurements, 7 and 11.5. Now that we have the boundaries of our landscape mapped out, I'm actually not going to do the full landscape, so the full backyard. I'm just focusing on this half. So to save myself some work and time, we're actually just going to go from a 90-degree angle out from our house. So this is a perfect corner, and just cut the yard in half so we can just focus on our project area. So I have this hooked to the house already, and I'm just going to walk backwards. And while you do this, you just want to make sure that you walk just as straight as you possibly can. Again, a 90-degree angle back from any solid object like a house, fence, shed, something like that. So dodge some trees back here, and here we are. So again, making sure the measuring tape is flat and level, even from where you started it, and it looks like I'm right at 43 feet. Okay, so I just measured out all my boundary points, and now we need to fill in the gaps. So map out where trees are going to stay, maybe a fire pit, features that you cannot easily move or that you aren't going to remove. So I have it hooked up to the corner of the house still, and I'm actually going to map it out to that Japanese maple right there. So to start doing that, again, we hook it to the corner of the house. Again, a helpful hand would be good, but you can do it yourself if you're determined enough. And so we go back, straight back to the Japanese maple tree, and we see that it's 31.5 feet. And so we're gonna, again, map that on our notes. So after we've taken our first measurement from this fence, again, our anchor point to our tree, we need to work in right angles. So that means we need to take the tree to our next anchor point, which is, again, in this situation, our boundary property fence. Because the tree doesn't have a really good attachment, I'm actually going to attach my measuring tape to the fence and walk straight back to the tree. So just attaching it here to the fence, and we're going to walk it straight back. Okay, so again, trying to be completely level, and it looks like our tree is 29 feet and 10 inches. So again, make this note on our map, and that way we can have our tree properly oriented in our map. So when it comes to marking things in your landscape, for example, this tree, it doesn't cast that much shade, but you might have trees in your yard that do provide a lot of shade. And in those cases, you want to note how big the canopy is so you can know what it shades out underneath. So for example, with this tree, again, it's not a huge shade tree, but we do want to denote the canopy. And on your map, it will be a circle with a dot in the center. The dot represents the trunk, and then the circle represents the canopy shade. So a couple ways you can do this. You can just simply lay your tape measure down at the drip line of the tree, which is the very edge. So I'm standing right at the drip line of this tree. So if you went the outer branch and drew a line straight down, that would be your canopy. Or what you can do is, I know this is a Japanese maple, I can just go online and see how big the canopy gets. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just trying to get an idea of where things are in your landscape. So feel free to estimate or round up or down depending on what you measure. So we have a couple things to measure. Now that we have our things like trees mapped out, we have our boundary lines, now we need to focus on features. So we have a rocky area here coming off of a patio, a fire pit, and then we have a raised planting bed right there. So we need to measure all of these objects. Same thing as before, going off of one of your anchor points and measuring it there. And when you have something like a fire pit that is round, you don't want to just measure to the edge of it. Try to always measure to the center of it, whether it's a drain pipe, whatever it may be. Get the center, and then don't forget to actually measure the fire pit itself, so measure the diameter of it. And I'll show you right here. So starting from our wooden area, we're going to put our measuring tape there and measure it just straight out, again working with 90-degree angles so it makes your life easier. And we're going to call this about 5 feet from the patio to the center point of the fire pit. And the next measurement we have to do is to see how deep it is. So we have one measurement, and again, we're working with 90 degrees. So we're gonna take our measurement from the center of the fire pit, going straight back again to that anchor point, that fence covered with ivy. So I'm just gonna hook it on the fire pit right there. So trying to hold it level so we get an accurate measurement. It looks like this is exactly 24 feet. And again, make notes as you go. And now that we know the position of it, we definitely need to know how big it is and how much space it takes up. So the easiest way to measure that is just measure the diameter if it's a circular item like this. The trees that we measured before weren't quite big enough to actually take up too much space. But for this, we're gonna estimate it to be about, let's see. Actually, it would be easier to take this off. Okay, there we go. That's a lot better. So it looks like it's exactly 2 feet and 7 inches. So again, make note of that so that we can have everything to scale. So we have the fire pit measured. Now we are going to measure this kind of rocky patio. Again, going off of our anchor point, y'all kind of know the drill by now. Start here and working in right angles. And because this has kind of a curve to it, we kind of just want to get different angles. You could do it 3 feet apart. If it's a sharper curve, you could do it maybe 1 foot apart. And eventually those little points will match up on your map where you can kind of connect the dots and get that curve. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm just going to show you just kind of one point. So going off of our anchor point, which in this case, the closest one is just the edge of the deck here. I'm going to lay that down and just try to get it as straight as we can to the edge. And at this point, we have 8.5 feet. So I'm gonna go and do that for the rest of the rocky area so we can have it on our map. Now that we have our notes, it's time to draw our actual base map. So I have graph paper here, I have my pen, a ruler, and then also the notes that I took from when we were measuring in the yard. So I'm gonna have that off to the side here so I can reference that. And the very first thing we need to do is determine a scale. What a scale is it just sizes down and makes sure it makes sure that everything is proportional to one another. So that way you can have a house that's actually the size of your house compared to a bench or something like that. So in this case, I like graph paper because it's already kind of scaled out. Each one of these squares is a 1/4 inch. So this square, which is a 1/4 of an inch, is going to equal, let's say, 2 feet in real life. If you have a larger property, you want to increase the scale, so maybe this is 5 or 10 feet. The smaller the property, like for us, we're only doing half of the backyard, we can stick to a pretty small scale like this. You can even do a 1/4 of an inch equals 1 foot. And if you don't have graph paper you're working with, you can of course work with plain paper and just use a ruler. You can also buy a scale ruler online if you choose to do that, but don't think that that's necessary for you to draw a base map. So let's start with the first thing that we measured, which is the ivy fence, and we're just going to place it in our landscape here, and I'm going to use a ruler just so that my lines are nice and straight. That one, according to my scale, well, we measured it to be 34 feet, but it's about 17 feet here. Not 17 feet, 17 squares here, so that's what we're going to do. So starting here, that's my point. Okay, and that's the other point, so that's 17 away. And just connect the two. And I'm just going to write ivy wall next to it so that I can orient myself. And I'm just going to go around the property doing our boundary lines just like that. All right, now that we have our boundaries laid out, I did go ahead and just label things like the house, the patio, how this is to the rest of the yard, just so that I have my orientation here. And now it's time to add in the different things like the gate, the Japanese maples, the 2 that we measured, and the fire pit and the rocky area. So starting with the gate, along this line, we measured the beginning, so where the gate opened up from, and the close, so where the hinge was. And those measurements were about here. Wait, 1, 2, 3, around here for the open, and the close was about here. And we're gonna say that it opens this way. So that's our fence. And for our first Japanese maple, that one was pretty easy. This is the corner of our house, and it was straight in line with that. So we're just going to go back however far it was from our property line, which we measured about here. So 1, 2, 3. So this is our first Japanese maple. And just gonna label that. And our second one, it was kind of in the middle of our property. It wasn't directly off of our property line. So we measured to this side of the property, so the ivy wall, and off of this fence. Remember that those are our anchor points, and that's why it's really helpful to work in right angles. So going down here, we're gonna measure. So it was about 5 in. According to my scale, of course. So it's about right there, and then we need to go the set amount down. All right, so it's about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, so it's right about there. All right, so those are our Japanese maples. And now we need to do the fire pit. And again, we just measured the distance from the patio and then to the property line to orient that as well. So that was about 2 in. Or about 4 feet in. and about 12 in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So right there was our fire pit. But remember, our fire pit is round. It's about 2.5 feet wide, I think we measured. And so that's why we need to actually do it round like that. And of course, remember to label everything as you go. And there's our fire pit. Now we need to draw in that rocky area to complete our map. And to measure the rocky area, we went at equal distances and measured out from our boundary lines. And I'm just going to fill in those points and then connect the dots, and then we'll have our rocky area. Okay, so now that we have the dots, connect them. And again, if you have a sharper curve than this, it would benefit you to measure more frequently. And then last but not least, we add our Japanese maple canopies. And there we go, we have our base map.